Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Mirror of Intimacy. Dr. Alexandra Katehakis, and today is Monday, May 1st. So happy May Day, everybody. Happy International Labor Day. So to all of the people who are out there working today, gratitude to all of you. Our topic today is caressing, which is a really sweet and beautiful word, I think, especially as we continue into the spring days and weeks to come. And so before I start, I want to remind you of a few things, as always, to type in your questions to the Q&A box, and I'll answer them as best I can as we go along. And also to leave us your book reviews or comments on Amazon. Let us know what you love about Mirror of Intimacy, how you've used it, different ways in which it has entered your life. We really appreciate the reviews. And also to remind you of my new book, What Turns You On? A Guide for Living Your Best Sex Life, which is a workbook and lots of fun, sort of a fun companion to Mirror of Intimacy that really has you delineating and asking and answering the question of what really turns me on at this phase of life. What do I like? What don't I like? And how can I best communicate that to a partner? If you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can do that by clicking the button below, and that way you'll never miss a post. You can also follow me on Instagram at Alex Katehakis or at Center for Healthy Sex. Our quote for today is from Nathaniel Hawthorne, and he writes, "Caresses, expressions of one sort or another, are necessary to the life of the affections as leaves are to the life of a tree. If they are wholly restrained, love will die at the roots." Now, we know that when children are not caressed, touched, especially infants and young children, that they suffer from something called failure to thrive. And even as adults, we will not thrive if we're not touched on a regular basis. So again, he says, caresses are expressions of one sort or another. One sort or another. What sort of expressions are your caresses when they come, when you give them? What is the meaning behind the touch that you are trying to communicate? And he also writes that they're necessary to the life of the affections as leaves are to the life of a tree. So leaves are to the life of a tree. That means leaves spring forth from the life of a tree. The leaves are an expression of that tree's beauty, its sturdiness, its health, its well-being, its ability to produce oxygen into the atmosphere. So our caresses are as necessary to the life of the affections. So in order to be affectionate, to give affection, our caresses are necessary for the people in our lives, the same ways that the tree expresses through leaves. And he says, if they are wholly restrained, love will die at the roots. So if there were no leaves, that means the tree is dead. It means tree is dead very, very deeply. At its roots, it's dead. So without caresses, if they're wholly restrained, then love will die at the roots. So think about the people in your life. Think about the creatures in your lives, your cats, your dogs, your bunny rabbits, or even maybe your reptiles, I don't know. And how often do you touch them, stroke them? Are you affectionate with them? How much do you give of yourself to them? So one way to think of caressing is to think of a warm summer breeze caressing your body, the way it feels when you're in a place where the air feels soft. And typically we feel that in the subtropics or the tropics, like Florida or Hawaii, that sort of warmth wrapping around the limbs of our body. And the softness you're left with as it passes over you. It's gentle, it's warm, it's breezy. There's a very kind of sensuous, luscious feeling about that sort of warm summer breeze caress. And this caress it can feel like unrestrained affection, the kind of unrestrained affection we feel when we're called to bestow those tender caresses on another, especially when we're in love. And when I think about the word caress, I think about tenderness and kindness, there is a timbre or a tone to that particular kind of touch. And it is the way that we touch infants or babies or young children. We don't do it in a rough way, in a gruff way. We're very aware of the softness and the tenderness of their skin, and also the fragility of their little bodies. So we're careful. We are kind. We are loving. We're soft with the ways that we go forward in our touch of them. And we also know that children will not thrive if they are not touched regularly, as I said earlier. So think about how generous you are with your touches, with your caresses, with your affection, and to whom you give those to. Caresses aren't just simple hugs, but they're moments of lushness. There's a calming to them that can be demonstrated in small gestures or small tokens of fondness for each other. And think about couples that you know, or maybe in your own coupleship, hopefully, where you have this capacity to have a private language with your loved one. And these small gestures are communicated not necessarily with direct touch, but with a simple note that might come in a text, or a sweet note or a post-it that you leave your lover on their car windshield or on their desk at work or at home. But there are ways that we communicate these feelings of caressing that we do in a very simple way, but in a coded language that two people share between the two of them. So even this token of fondness can be something that we leave for a coworker or a friend. And that, I think, is a useful thing to think about also when you think about caressing others, that it doesn't just have to be familial, it can be friendly also. Okay, so a caress, again, can be received upon reuniting with your partner after a long day at work, or it might be just the medicine you need to feel more deeply connected with each other. So simply rubbing your partner's shoulders can lead to gentle kissing of the neck, the ears, the lips, and that becomes a communication of its own. Just a simple gesture can be so, so powerful to the person that you're trying to connect with. And sometimes when there's been distance in a relationship or a breach of trust in a relationship, for example, when there's been betrayal trauma, it's difficult to start to bridge those things, to make that connection with each other, to communicate the feeling that you're feeling in your heart, but you're so afraid of being rejected or pushed away in some way, that taking the risk to be caressing, to be communicative, even though the person on the receiving end of it may not want it at that moment. And that's okay. At least you took the risk. You made the offering. You made the gesture. You opened the door for an opportunity to have that kind of kindness between the two of you. And even the person who's feeling a little frosty, and maybe you've had that experience yourself of being the one who's on the frosty end of receiving these things, does a little bit of a double take. Maybe ask themselves, why am I being so defensive right now? What would it cost me to actually drop this feeling and to let my partner in, to receive this invitation of caressing, to connect, to be tender, to be kind with each other, and drop the defensive anger, fighting, warring with each other. There are other times when you and your lover might encounter each other intensely just by looking into each other's eyes. And if that's the case, you use that as an offering. You use that as a way to open up to each other, to communicate in this quiet way, which can be loving and kind and a deliberate communication, so to speak. And that can move you, if you're exhausted or disconnected in some way, into a state of more vitality, into a state of gratitude and even joy with each other. So play around with these ideas of caressing that don't have to do with actual touch, which is how we typically think about it. See if you can play with it energetically through your eyes, through a note, through a gesture that communicates to the other. And this is also in the land of flirtation, or can be as well. Someone writes, I feel a kind of panic when a guy is approaching me or making tender touch. Last time I had that tenderness, I wanted to cry. So let the tears come. Don't be afraid of that vulnerability. This sort of tender touch, this kind of affection, opens us to our own vulnerability, to our own gratitude. It's a heart opening. And so if that is an invitation to let your heart melt, that you do start crying, don't be apologetic for that. Allow yourself to be open and open-hearted and be very disinterested in what that person thinks about you. If they get upset or freaked out, then you don't want to be with someone like that to begin with. So let your tears be tears of whatever they are. They can be tears of joy. They can be tears of sadness or trauma because someone hasn't invited you in or been kind to you in that way in a long time. So just let whatever comes come and flow with it, and be honest to yourself about your vulnerability and welcome it. So think about this, that without affection in the form of touch, patting, stroking, again, an infant will fail to thrive and even die. Seriously, the touch is crucial to that infant's developing nervous systems. And that never stops. It doesn't go away. That need persists into adulthood. Caresses remain an important and essential form of communication between one nervous system and another nervous system. When you're upset or need any kind of comfort, the quickest way to calm down is for someone who cares about you to touch you gently. Even strangers, if we are crying in public or upset, will lend a hand to our shoulder. A kind relative or a friend will maybe put their hand on your thigh. These are soothing gestures, soothing touches that allow us to communicate to each other that it's going to be okay, that you're not alone, that you matter, that you are loved, and that you are being seen and welcomed. So invite that sort of touch in and that kind of caressing communication, and be generous with it yourself. You'll find if you're generous with it, it comes back to you with equal generosity. I think it's also important to note that there is a matter of consent in this as well. When it's important to ask somebody that you don't know well if you can touch them, if you can give them a hug. Someone writes a note, what if you're touch averse? Well, if you're touch averse and you want to change that, you have to really work with these structures in the nervous system and notice what happens to you when someone touches you, that you actually recoil and you feel the recoiling in your body. And so let yourself recoil, but notice it, and then notice what happens if you take a deep breath and you try to prevent that recoiling from happening, that you don't disappear so quickly into your system, that you let yourself linger with the touch and simply say thank you to the person who's touching you, or hold eye contact with them for just a second longer. And let yourself receive that touch, because the autonomic nervous system is equally as plastic as the central nervous system, as the brain. So the more you work with that, the more you allow touch and you allow it in, the more you'll be able to tolerate it for longer periods of time. So don't be afraid. Someone writes, what can you do to stop feeling sad and angry about the lack of touch and love you didn't receive as a child? Well, that becomes a vicious circle, because being angry about what you didn't get is a defense against getting it. So that means you're still unavailable to it. And there's sort of a perverted and distorted irony in that. The thing that you're angry about not getting, you will not get because you remain angry. And so you have to find a way to look at what defense that anger is providing you with. And typically there's fear under that anger. There's terror even that you're never going to get what you want and need. But as long as you're angry about it, you are guaranteeing that you will never get what you want and need. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So deconstructing that anger, whether it's through affirmations, daily journaling, talking to a therapist about it, is going to be crucial to the dropping of those defenses so that you can tolerate touch and invite touch. And when you get touch, notice how the very thing you want more than anything in the world is the thing that you push away. So you have to work at these constructs, and they take time, but they do change over time. This is no different than I was talking to someone this morning about having tight muscles and how stretching isn't enough, that you have to stretch a lot for a long period of time to reorganize and re-educate the muscles. It's not just, oh, I did some stretches this morning and why is my back still tight? Well, it's tight because it has a long history of being tight or sitting in a particular way. And every single day, morning and night, the stretches slowly start to unwind those patterns. And likewise with touch, that these are a slow unwinding of giving and receiving hugs. Being able to tolerate them for 1 second, 2 seconds, a minute is a long hug, 3 minutes is a very long hug, but you will be able to change that over time if you keep working with these issues internally. If you were touch deprived as a child, is what we've just been talking about, then emotionally closing off may be your default mode, right? And it's habituated is what I mean by default mode. So you want to start slowly by caressing your partner and asking for caresses. And if you don't have a partner, to start asking for this from your friends. Can I have a hug? Or if you're walking down the street, can I put my arm around your shoulder? And what does that feel like for you and for the other party? And sort of use the people around you for touch with permission. So caress your partner, ask for caresses. This delicate form of touch will teach you the importance of being responsible for what you want and need and exactly how to communicate it. Because oftentimes we're angry that we didn't get the mothering we needed as a child or the parenting we needed. But as adults, that window is largely closed. We're not ever going to get that. Our mother from our childhood is not going to magically show up. So we have to reparent ourselves. And that means we have to get in touch with what we need, and we have to be clear about what those needs are. And then we have to learn how to appropriately ask for those needs. And it can be done. People can earn secure attachments in love relationships. And it starts with friends. It starts with groups. That's why 12-step meetings and fellowships are so incredibly healing to people in recovery, regardless of what they're in recovery from, because it's a community of concern, of people that care about you, that are interested in you, that want to know how you're doing, that will give you a hug happily, because they too need to receive hugs. So this goes both ways. It is a giving and receiving proposition. It's not about being in isolation any longer. So learning how to communicate your needs. First of all, you have to identify your needs. Then you have to identify what you want, and then you have to ask for what you want. So it's easy to identify, I'm hungry for most of us. That's a very clear signal coming from the body. I'm hungry. So if I'm hungry, I'm identifying what the need is. And then I'm also asking myself, well, if I'm hungry, what do I need? The question is, I need food, right? Generically. So if I'm homeless and I'm starving, I need food. If I'm privileged and I'm hungry, I get to get food typically. And then the question is, well, what do I want? I actually have a choice of what kind of food I want. And wanting, having a choice about wanting is more of a luxury than just being in a need survival state. So track into your body, ask yourself, what's going on in my body right now? What do I need? And what do I want? And who am I going to ask to give this to me? Who I know will give this to me? You can start by asking your lover for a gentle stroking massage. And what does that feel like? Especially if you're just receiving touch, you're not directing the touch. You're not telling the person what kind of pressure you want or what you want them to touch. You're telling them exactly what you don't want touched and what you do want touched, and that's it. And then you're the receiver. So what does that feel like? And do you relax or do you tense up? And notice when you're tensing up and where the defense is against that. What muscles are tensing? Why are they're tensing? What exactly is going on? And then if you tense up, ask your lover to alter his or her touch until it feels right to you. So all of us have, for the most part, have had a professional massage, and the massage therapist will always ask if that is too much touch or not enough touch. They ask you if you want it to go deeper or lighter. So they're calibrating, and they're having you calibrating to what feels right to you. So don't be afraid to ask your lover, your partner, to calibrate their touch to what feels good to you. Some people like a light touch, some people want much deeper touch. And everybody is different. Everybody has different pleasure and pain connections in their bodies. So don't be shy about asking for what you need. And don't forget to breathe. We could say that breathing is an internal caress. Just like when you take a deep breath and you feel your lungs and your belly and your whole body and your head, that's sort of like the summer breeze wrapping itself around all of your limbs. So you're filling your vital organs with essential energy and oxygen for life when you take a deep breath, inhaling through your nostrils and exhaling. That is a caress. That's an essential energy caress for life. And pay attention to your own breath today. Whether you're filling your lungs deeply or breathing shallowly, notice what's happening in your body and where you maybe deprive yourself even of the basics of oxygen, and start to fill yourself up from within. And when you meet with a loved one, a partner, a child, stroke your partner's face while looking into his or her eyes. And what do you see there? How does what you see make you feel? This is so much easier with children. It's easy to touch their yummy skin, their delicious cheeks, to look into their eyes because they're filled with wonderment, and they fill us with wonderment. But can you see that child in your partner? Can you look deeply into their heart and their soul and caress their face, their eyelids, their ears, touching their lips, as you feel them internally when you do this, as you make contact with them, in deep, deep gratitude for the love that you feel for them? So this would be a good place to stop for questions. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts about this topic? I love what you said today. Wow, do I remind myself of these things in the midst of being emotionally triggered? How do I access this understanding in those moments of madness? Well, that's a great and funny question, because when we're in moments of madness, we can't engage in these behaviors. So a very simple sort of neuroscience lesson is that our prefrontal cortex, when you think about your forehead, it's the prefrontal lobe, is the biggest operating system in the brain, and it needs a lot of oxygen in order to function. So if you're sitting here with a cup of tea, listening to me talk, you are in what we call a regulated state. You have good heart rate variability. You're not triggered. You're not terribly anxious. You're not sweating. You're not in any danger if you're sitting watching this on a device. But if your anxiety starts to go up, if you are triggered when you are with a partner and you are angry or you're fighting, you have less of your prefrontal cortex available to you. And if you're really angry, those systems are generally not available to us, and you're strictly in what we would call a limbic response state. This is the deeper part of the brain that activates the fight and flight circuits in our autonomic nervous system. So at that moment, you're in an altered state of consciousness. The organism is only looking to fight, to defend itself, or to run away from the offending object or experience. So it's very difficult to be regulated, to be logical, to be thinking in those moments, because we're just in a reactive state. So the answer to your question is to get out of the reactive state, to downregulate that state, to take a time out, to breathe, to go for a walk, and then come back, first of all, and admit that you were wrong, because you have to repair quickly in relationships in order for them to survive. So quickly make the repair, whether or not you were right or wrong. Apologize for your part in it, because We're all 50% responsible for the arguments we're in, whether we think so or not. It can't be any other way. So take your own inventory, look at your part in it, apologize to your partner. That will help downregulate your partner also. And then you can be in a much more regulated state to say, I'm sorry, which is a state of vulnerability. Just say, I'm sorry, I was wrong about that, about whatever my part was in it. And then you can meet your partner in eye contact because you're not feeling shame or shut off, and you're back into a regulated state. Someone asks how to reinitiate physical touch in a relationship which has been harmed by infidelity. Well, that is a very long trajectory. And so since I don't know your whole story, it's a difficult question to ask because both parties have to be willing. Both parties have to have been in some kind of recovery together, because if they're not, it won't go well. And both parties have to turn towards each other without resentment before they can start to reinstate that kind of touch. I think one of the most important things, though, is that touch does not equal sex. And just because we're touching does not mean there's a green light to be sexual. So the rules of engagement have to be clear. And this is, again, where consent comes into play, where consent is a moment-to-moment conversation. So the question might be, in your case, I don't know, but it might be, can I hold your hand right now if we're walking down the street? Would it be okay with you if I held your hand? And just notice what that feels like to be touching hands once again. And start there. And if you engage in touch, it's important to let your partner know what parts of your body you don't want touched. And if you're on the receiving end of that, you absolutely must adhere to that request. So if someone says, do not touch my right elbow, then do not touch their right elbow until they give you consent to touch their right elbow. And other than that, if you can touch everything else, great, but don't touch the part they're asking you not to touch. So as you're probably hearing in what I'm saying, you have to have extremely clear boundaries and deep conversations with each other about what you want and when you want touch to start and how it's going to go, and what the rules of engagement will be, and to not violate those, because if they're violated, then trust is broken again and you're back at ground zero again. So these require a lot of intentionality, a lot of vulnerability, and a lot of kindness. I would say kindness would be the overarching directive in these instances. As a follow-up to fight or flight, when we are in a state of high lust, which of the two states is it? I'm sure my thinking brain is unavailable at that time too. Well, that's true. If you're in a high arousal state, that's high sympathetic arousal state, that is the fight or flight system. In the autonomic nervous system, it's the sympathetic branch of that system, technically. And that system activates us and engages us to mobilize in the world. It's not just in a lust state. It can be in any kind of acquisition state of reward. If you're playing a sport, you're going to be in high sympathetic arousal. If you're excited about your birthday party, that's high sympathetic arousal. But the higher level of excitation, the more we can start to become dysregulated when we are unable to regulate that state of arousal. So if you're in a state of lust, your brain is unavailable to you, then we're talking about a state of sexuality, I believe. So long before you reach that kind of arousal, you should be in conversations with your partners about consent and touch and things of that nature. Once you're in the sexual act, it's true, there's much less thinking going on and much more of a visceral experience of feeling, touching, being with. All of our other senses are activated as they should be, and you have to have enough sympathetic arousal to get up over the orgasm threshold anyway. But if you're in too much sympathetic arousal, if you're being assaulted sexually, then that's a whole different matter. You cannot think at that time for the most part because you're in a survival state. All right, so as I think about taking a deep breath as we enter the last month of spring, these beautiful spring days, I don't know about where you are, but we're having a super bloom here in California. Even the ground cover is blooming. So it's really a stunning, stunning time right now. I wish you all a beautiful spring and all of the best as you go forward in this month of May, as we recognize all of the mothers out there, the mothers who have literally given birth, those of us that mother people, that mother organizations or groups of people, that mother our gardens and our furry pets. Much love to all of you in this beautiful month of May, and I look forward to seeing you next month. Take care, and thank you again for all of your comments, both for Mirror of Intimacy and for What Turns You On.